Isn't Ukraine just a separatist Russian province? A brief on Ukrainian history, what factors defines it, and how it has been different from Russia long before the Muscovite expansion. By Kamil Galeev. Isn't Ukraine just a separatist Russian province? Many foreigners ask themselves this question, the same way many Eastern Slavs think that all British Isles are just England, and yet, dynamics of Russian-Ukrainian relations are different from the dynamics of Anglo-Celtic ones. Thread. To start with, both Russia and Ukraine were initially shaped by the Slavic expansion. That's one possible theory of how it meant. There are many, and yet, it's highly likely that the colonization of what is now Russia initially went largely from what is now Ukraine. You see the direction of Slavic expansion on this map of Uralic languages. There's a huge empty space between Baltic Finns in the west and Volga Finns plus Siberian Uralics in the east. Finnic people used to live here, but were wiped out or assimilated during the Slavic expansion. Central Russia was colonized by Slavs from Ukraine and Belarus, who wiped out Finnic and Baltic natives. The town of Moscow was first mentioned in a chronicle which described the expedition against Baltic Goliad tribe in 1147. Now nothing remains from those guys except toponyms. Another factor which shaped the history of the region was the Viking, Varangian invasion of the 9th–10th centuries. Vikings entered Slavic lands by rivers, sailed upstream and pushed deep inland, establishing their rule. Slavs called them Rus, probably a borrowed Finnic word. Soon Vikings discovered they can get from the Baltic to the Mediterranean using inland waterways. Enter the mouth of Neva and then through Ladoga, Volkhov, Ilmen and Lovt sail south, do a portage to the Dnieper and sail downstream all the way to the Black Sea and Constantinople. This way from Varangians to the Greeks was the major commercial artery. Novgorod, Smolensk, Kyiv etc. were major towns on that waterway. Soon Ethman and Rus extended from the Vikings to their Slavic subjects, too, and yet, only the lands around the waterway were considered Rus. This originally the country of Rus included only this old Viking-dominated country stretching from Novgorod to Kyiv and nothing else. Of course, soon descendants of Vikings established their rule over the northeastern lands, future Muscovy, but it was not considered as Rus. By 12th century political landscape changed. Earlier princes fought to rule over Kyiv, this ancient seat of power. Andrei Bogolyubsky, the Prince of Vladimir, was a major innovator. In 1169 he burnt Kyiv down and left home, thus shifting the seat of power to the newly colonized northeast. Interestingly enough, Vladimir was not considered Rus by anyone, including the locals themselves. When Prince Andrei was killed by his own Bodgers, the chronicler lamented there's no one to succeed him, his brothers being far away, in Rus. The rise of Vladimir was interrupted by the Mongols, who destroyed it just few decades after Andrei destroyed Kyiv, and yet, the legacy of Prince Andrei remained. First of all the future powers that would contest the rule over the region were coming from the northeast. Secondly, political culture of Vladimir and its successor states was different. Kyiv and Novgorod were far more republican, with citizens' assembly, Vesh, Vachai, playing a huge role in governance. Meanwhile, Vladimir never had Vesh. It was far more monarchical and autocratic. Moscow was a successor state of Vladimir and inherited its monarchic tradition. Thus whenever Moscow would annex more republican cities, it would destroy the Vesh bell that called for Vesh to assemble. You see, as Muscovites take away the Novgorod bell after the city is annexed, long after the Mongol conquest, all the other polities lived in the shadow of the Golden Horde Kipchak Khanate. Some of them would actively collaborate, like Moscow, whose princes were chief tax collectors for the Horde. Others would just hide away in the forests like Lithuanians. But in 1357 Khan Janibek died and the empire spiraled into chaos. 2 years later, his son Berdybek was killed and the legitimate dynasty of Batu Khan ended. For the next 20 years at least 25 pretenders ruled in the capital, many more in the provinces. The empire ceased to exist. Who benefited from this chaos? Well, 2 powers. One of them was Moscow, another was Lithuania. Lithuania were the last pagan state in Europe, With the horde in disarray they annexed vast Slavic and Christian Orthodox lands, thus becoming the largest empire in the continent. You see Mozhaysk, that's a town 100 kilometers west from Moscow. It was a Lithuanian border fort. They pushed really deep inland. Slavs who used to rely on protection of a big empire were defenseless against Lithuanian pagans hardened in battles against the genocidal Teutonic Crusaders. Here you see Eastern Europe by the late 14th. Lithuania, orange, was huge and contiguous. Muscovite, green, much smaller and non-contiguous, half of its land being a disconnected northern exclave, like future Prussia Brandenburg. Why? I'll explain it in my first Substack post. With the Kipchak Khanate collapsing, Moscow and Lithuania became rivals for the power over the Slavic Orthodox lands. How did they view each other? More specifically, how did Moscow view itself and Lithuania in the context of Russianness? We have a great source on that. Russian chronicles since late 14 often included a list of Russian towns, close ones, and remote ones. Russian towns were classified into the towns of 1. Bulgaria 2. Wallachia, equals Romania, 3. Podolia 4. Kiev 5. Volyn 6. Lithuania 7. Smolensk 5. Ryazan 6. Zalesye 7. Tver. So, modern Central Russia, including Moscow, was called Zalesye equals behind the forest. While Moscow was asserting its position as the capital of the Slavic and Orthodox world, this toponym implied it was a newly colonized land in the boreal forests of the northeast. But let's look deeper. The list includes lands which nobody now considers Russian, like Bulgaria or Romania. Probably by the late Middle Ages the meaning of the term Rus changed. Now it meant people who use Old Church Slavonic as the language of religion, like Romanians. The term Rus, which once referred to the Viking invaders, now appropriated religious and even eschatological connotations. Rus, the land which used the Old Church Slavonic, was Kazakhstan, the last bastion of Christianity in the world falling under the power of Antichrist. In 1439 collapsing Byzantium submitted to the Pope, but Russians wouldn't buy it. When a Greek bishop of Moscow returned from the Florentine Council and preached the union with Rome, he was imprisoned. That was a major turning point. Since then only Slavs led the Russian Church. When Constantinople fell to the Turks just 14 years after the Church Union, Eastern Slavs saw a clear causation. The Second Rome stood for 1,000 years, until it was corrupted by the Latin heresy and betrayed God. Now it fell, and we are the last Christian power in the world. Muscovite ideology is understandable only within this religious and eschatological context. Rus equals the land of the Old Church Slavonic, and with the Greeks falling to the Latin heresy, it is the last bastion of Christianity in the world, checking the advance of the devilish forces. So the Rus is a religious community spreading across all political lines. And what is the worst danger for this community? Well, that it falls to the satanic Latin heresy the way the Constantinople did. Unfortunately, that was exactly what was happening by the 1400s. In 1385 Jogaila, the last pagan Duke of Lithuania, signed the Union of Kryuo. As a part of his marriage contract with the Polish heiress Jadwiga, he agreed to convert to Catholicism. After that, Jogaila was crowned as the King of Poland, creating a dual Polish-Lithuanian monarchy. Moscow wouldn't buy it, neither would Lithuanian Slavic Orthodox aristocrats concerned about their status in a now Catholic country. This gave Moscow both a casus belli and a huge fifth column within Lithuania. Rome was satanic, we remember, and now Lithuania turned to the Satan. The conflict was triggered by the Novgorod question. Kipchak Khanate, weakened it was still a former overlord of Moscow, Tver, Novgorod, etc. Thus Polish-Lithuanian King Casimir IVJ Gilan purchased Jarlik, a license to rule over Novgorod, from Khan Ahmad.